Welcome to the Vine Podcast. This is Warren, and today we're going to talk about the ways that our political and religious values influence ethical decision-making. There's a lot of potential ground for us to cover there, so we're going to jump right into some conversation today, and I'm going to welcome in the two people that are joining me for this conversation today. One is a regular contributor to this podcast space. Jason is back with me today. Hello, Jason.
Hey, Warren. Great to be here on this wonderful day.
Yeah, absolutely. And joining us for this conversation, making his return to the Vine podcast, actually, is one of Jason's colleagues at UMHB, Dr. Jude Austin. So good morning, Jude, and thank you for jumping back on with us and being with us again.
Good morning. Thanks for the invite. I think I'm technically a friend of the pod, right? That's what they
friend of the pod. That's
what they say. Yeah,
lingo. That's what they would say. Yeah, that's true. Except I think to keep that moniker, you have to keep coming back with us at least every so often. So so we're down with that as well. I really enjoyed getting to talk to you last time you were on with us, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today. And so before we jump into the really meaty stuff, I did want to ask you one question first, because I noticed, so Jason, I'd mentioned this topic to Jason. He was going to reach out to you about it. And so he included me in that initial email that he sent you. And in that email, it started, "Hey, Jude." Yeah. And when I read that greeting, I just immediately heard the song in my head.
I didn't even think of that. I'm so sorry. I did not even think of that.
I'm wondering, Jude, how many references to the song "Hey Jude" do you hear in the course of your just day-to-day life?
In my day-to-day, probably a good, I don't know, every 5 to 10 interactions, somebody will say, "Hey Jude, hey Jude, hey Jude," which I'm completely fine with. I have absolutely no problem with.
And do you have people that's do you have people that think they're the first ones that have thought of it, they're being clever as they say it?
I think it's probably after they say it, then about 30 seconds later, they're like, "You've heard this before." Yeah. Heard it before?
Yes, I have. That's good. I just saw that when I read the email, I thought, yeah, I would think that'd be one of the things that would get old after a while, maybe. But
you know what? It doesn't, man. I used to play professional soccer, and I would have fans cheering it. They would be singing the song because I was a goalkeeper.
Oh, that's cool.
And so every time I hear it, I think of those moments. So I'm on.
Oh, that's cool.
Often.
Do you ever listen to the song voluntarily?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, randomly. Yeah, they'll come on, and I never think, yeah, they're talking about me. Yeah, that's my song. It's just a good song, man. It's a good song. I got lucky enough to have the name. So
that's cool. I heard a pastor speak one time who had a grandson named Jude, and he talked about playing that song for his toddler grandson on the guitar. And he's like, "I think my toddler grandson thinks that I wrote it for him. Yeah. And he's going to grow up someday and learn this actually."
Hey, the Beatles are playing my dad's song. The Beatles
are right. That's good. Well, anyways, I just wanted to start with that and get your perspective on that. Now for other things. So you so part of your bio on your UMHB page, which I know I'm not telling you anything, obviously you don't know, but just to kind of tell some of our other listeners, you had mentioned on your bio on that page that your research and scholarship chiefly focuses on identifying ways that counselor training programs can help students develop therapeutic presence with their clients.
Yeah.
And then you list several different directions that has led you in its kind of area of focus. And one of those is exploring the political and religious values influence on ethical decision making.
Yeah.
And so that's what we want to kind of think about and talk about today. And I know you had said that most of your research there kind of focuses on kind of that topic as it relates to counseling and to the counselor or client relationship, but that kind of extends, that the research and study could extend out from there to kind of broader application.
For sure.
And so that's where we're going to kind of focus most of our time there this morning in our conversation. But I do want to maybe start with just this question of how did you become interested in this connection between between values and ethical decision making. And was this something that you had already kind of been interested in exploring, or did you kind of come into this because of this broader area of study of developing presence between counselors and clients?
I think that the latter. So I did my dissertation study on helping students develop therapeutic presence. And within those qualitative interviews, there was a participant who asked a question about what else plays a role in the way that counselor educators train students to be more therapeutically present. And the participant mentioned, I think all facets of our life play some impact, and one of the biggest areas was politics and religion, and how those things tend to be topics we don't talk about in counselor training. We do in our program, but in other programs, sometimes it tends to be not a focus of their program. And so we were on the heels of when President Trump was elected. I was working at Old Dominion University of Virginia, and that city, Norfolk, was sort of split. And I was teaching a class that night during the election. And you can tell that the room was split 50-50. And there was people in tears and people cheering within the same class, And so we had to stop class and have a kind of broader discussion about what does this mean for us as counselors in training, and what does this mean for the community that we're working in? And I was teaching an ethics class. And so that topic just started to kind of, simmer and marinate. And I just pulled a colleague in, one of my good friends, Christine Berger, and we just started talking, and it evolved from there. And so that's how we got interested. And I think after we did the first interviews with participants, like I did an interview, she did an interview, and we sat in an office and just kind of discussed it. We were like, whoa, like this is probably something we should be studying, and also something we're a little terrified of studying as well, So that's the makeup of it. That's the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, because it would seem, maybe just from an outsider's perspective, like, how could a counselor not bring their own kind of religious, political thoughts, values into that conversation, and to have to, because I'm guessing you want to try as much as you can to be unbiased in those sessions. I don't know if unbiased is the best word, but it's the best word I can come up with right now.
Sure.
And so you almost have to be very aware, I guess, of your own, what's driving your own thoughts and perspective, I guess, in some sense.
Well, the fact of the matter is you can't not bring yourself to the counseling room. You're a human being, and you don't cease to be a human being when you become a counselor. Absolutely. And while your personal, you're not there to advocate for your own personal beliefs and agenda. It's naive to think that that's not going to influence how you think and interact with your clients. And so as counselor educators, what we're trying to help students do is become aware of that, and kind of know how to balance that line between being true to yourself and meeting the clients where they are. That's where the challenge comes in. And most of it has to do with remembering, what is your role in this moment? Your role is not to be a political advocate for one direction or another. Your role is to help with the distress and the struggle that the client may be experiencing. And, frankly, that might have to do with their, socio-political positions. It's not to say that doesn't influence our distress. But if that's going to change, then our job is to guide clients to that conclusion on their own, rather than saying, hey, the problem is that you hold this belief, and that's creating a lot of conflict for you.
If you would just change, then you would be fine.
Right.
I think, going into a session, and this is some of the stuff we found in the research, was if you went into a session acting as if all of you is going to impact that client, your beliefs, your values, your religious beliefs, political beliefs, leanings, wherever that is, if you act as if it's going to, you can tend to have a more secure therapeutic relationship, because you're aware of what's going on in there. It's when you act as if you're objective that those things tend to insidiously slip in. And it's not the big, like, you shouldn't vote for such and such. It's the insidious little tiny micro reactions to something. When someone says, I'm on, welfare, and it's the facial expressions of a counselor that tells their political leanings or thoughts on that will impact the client and trigger their feelings of, not being safe, which will then make them not be vulnerable, which will then dissolve the whole therapeutic relationship. It's like little micro skills that these beliefs are impacting, so small to where you would probably walk out of a session thinking that was great, and the client will walk out of the session thinking, why do I feel so impacted by this? That felt weird, so it's those things that I think the research kind of picked up on as we did the interviews. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about kind of that research then. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And so you kind of recognize that there's something here that needs to be explored.
Yes.
What did that study look like? What do those interviews look like as you go about trying to nail some of this down in ways that you can kind of share and learn from and develop some stuff from?
For sure. Yeah. We thought we were going to have about, 5 to 10 interviews, because it was qualitative. So it was qualitative and it was a basic phenomenological research study, but we just wanted to figure out people's lived experiences and how they navigate ethical decision-making as they see clients and how their politics and religious views impact that. So it was a basic qualitative study. We put out a email kind of, inviting people to come in, and we had like 30 something interviews. I mean, this is qualitative, which, I'm sure people who aren't a nerd right now are thinking, what's qualitative? But I'm a nerd. And so qualitative is basically you're capturing thick, rich descriptions of people's lived experiences. And so usually there's a small population of people you're interviewing because you're not looking for generalizability. And so we just wanted people's lived experience. And it was a hot topic. I mean, we probably did it within a month after the election. And it kind of went a year to a year and a half after the election, and so it was just hot. So we split up the participants into a couple of different categories, depending on their religious and political beliefs. We asked them the same questions. It was semi-structured. So we had, I think, about 10 to 15 questions that were standard. And then we kind of flexed in and out. And we did constant comparative analysis, which basically meant that after each interview, we analyzed the data. And the results, I think, to us were shocking, in the sense that we didn't find what we expected to find, even though we went in there inductively. We had some expectations, but we were a little bit shocked on mainly the fear and how much fear drove people's political and religious beliefs, the dogmatism of their beliefs, and there's no causation, but the correlation definitely, and we heard it in people's voices, was as fear went up, almost like blindedness went up as well. So it's like as they were afraid, dogmatism went up, and then they were also a little bit blind. So you heard people say things like, "Oh, Christians are so judgmental," and then they'd follow that up with judgments about Christians. And then we interviewed Christians, and Christians were, and not all of them, right, but majority of them were humble and kind of, I understand why people would fear, us now in counseling, and why, some of the beliefs, especially because the more outspoken individuals in the field tend to be, people you don't want outspoken for your community, and so there was some give and take. It wasn't like one group was bad and the other one was good. It was just interesting seeing the different dynamics play out. So yeah, that's the basic overview of the structure of the study and some of the findings, but there was a lot of findings in there, man.
Yeah. So you mentioned that as fear went up, you said kind of blindness went up.
Yeah.
Right. And that was what you said. So I want to just clarify one thing there. When you say that, do you mean kind of blindness to other perspectives, or kind of maybe a lack of understanding of other perspectives, or will to kind of explore other perspectives? Or
I think
is that kind of what you mean by that?
I think a little bit of that, yes, but I think overall it was a blindness on how they affected other people, right?
Oh, okay.
Even during the interview, you know, because nobody knew our religious beliefs or our political, you know, standings at all. And so some of the stuff they would say to you during an interview, you know, me and my co-researcher, we'd come back like, oh my, like I was triggered, but you know, you don't say anything. You just kind of try your best to listen and gather data.
Right.
As people would say things and you're just like, man, I'm a Christian. I don't believe that at all. You know?
Yeah.
And they just, you know, would say stuff. And so, and you want to defend yourself, you know, wait a minute, you know,
right.
But you can't, you know, because you got to collect the data. And so it felt like not a blindedness in their views, or not that they weren't researched or well versed in their views, but it was how it impacted other people, you know, like, and how it seems like they don't necessarily, a lot of individuals there, especially when the fear went up, there was maybe a lack of outward or other awareness, you know. And so
that reminds me that, you know, whenever you engage with ideas or beliefs that you may disagree with, there has to be a certain amount of respect that you have for that, at least for the person who's holding those beliefs and opinions. You don't have to agree with it. And I don't think respecting those people, you know, amounts to an endorsement of their beliefs or opinions. But like, if I'm going to engage with someone about, you know, a belief that I find to be very toxic, or that I find to be very problematic and even damaging to others, I can't just go in and start spewing information about how awful they are. I can't just start name calling and, you know, talking about the evils, because I mean, what am I doing at that point? Am I actually trying to have a positive influence? Am I actually trying to have a conversation with somebody, or am I just wanting to you know, create conflict in that moment? That's why I actually was reading a book last night about a completely different topic, and it had an entirely different chapter where it was discussing how to engage with people who believe radically different from you on that topic.
Yeah.
And it basically amounted to treat them with respect, treat them, you know, understand that they, you know, have come to their conclusions for reasons that are meaningful to them. And you're not going to change any hearts or minds if you neglect those facts.
Absolutely. And, you know, to add on to that, you know, the opposite was when people were less afraid, right? And more trusting in something, right? Especially if they trusted in God, the fear went down and the cultural humility went up. Right. So we experienced, or we heard people, you know, say things. I mean, my way isn't the way. I understand why people would believe this, you know, and I think that separated, right, the individuals, our experience of them sharing, that they tended to be a little bit less like angry or afraid, or at least emotionally reactive. You know, and they were more willing to I don't know, to share both sides of it, you know, and they were able to talk a little bit clearer about how their viewpoints impacted their decision making, as opposed to kind of maybe ranting or sharing and getting tangential, like they were able to kind of focus in a little bit more. I think like that cultural humility piece that Jason was talking about, where you just say, well, maybe my way isn't the right way. It changes everything. It changes your whole orientation towards another person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember that phrase, cultural humility, is something that I've actually carried with me, that you brought up, I think, in the last conversation we had with you a while back, that I think you kind of ended with, that has been a good phrase for me to keep in mind. It's been helpful for me. And I do think, I hopefully people can see the obvious, what I think are obvious connections here between the research that you've done, as you said, that has at least kind of focused on the counseling arena first. Yes. But man, these are things that we all struggle with, of being aware of maybe how our own thoughts, values come across to others, what we may be projecting as we kind of just interact with other people. Mm-hmm. All of those things. Because one of the things that I thought of as you were talking about what counselors might bring to conversations is the ways in which we do that. That if, for instance, if I have kind of come to a conclusion of the loving way to act, and, on a particular situation is this, mm-hmm. as I share that conclusion that I've come to, it can come across to someone who doesn't share that as I'm saying they are unloving. Mm-hmm. I'm saying they are somehow less than or judgmental or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something we struggle with as both religious and political kind of thinkers and people, mm-hmm. of how do I hold my position with conviction while also having some humility towards someone who arrives at something else.
Absolutely. And who arrives to the conversation in a different place.
Right. Yeah.
Like in a very different place. I feel like, that relates to new believers and old believers, and, trying to have a conversation about, God, or trying to have a conversation about religion or spirituality. It's, you kind of have to meet people where they are, and I think mm-hmm. that's one of the things that we found, helped students be more therapeutically present, to, not to go back to the research, but to talk about that, is that everybody comes with a different level of presence, a different way that they impact those around them, and another big kind of find from the study was that, man, the more people are aware of that, the easier it is to pull other people in towards them, to have these discussions about politics and religion.
Yeah. And, in our context here in this podcast, at least we are obviously a church affiliated podcast. So we're a Christian, based podcast. And so I do think that connects with Christian community, because we may not use this language, but I think part of what we want to forge in Christian community is presence, right? Presence with each other, relational presence with each other. Cool. And so we have to recognize, or it would at least, it would help us to recognize these same things as we try to be present with each other in Christian community. Yeah. And I want to come back to a little bit of what you said about the research too, before I want to maybe go to a little bit of a different kind of angle with it. But
sure.
So you talked about kind of being surprised by what you saw in the fear. And before that, you said that what you found wasn't what you were expecting to find. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about that. What were you expecting to find then?
Okay, so we were interviewing counselors, right? Mm-hmm. I expected to find mature, self-aware, self-actualized even, individuals who have went through 3 years of a grueling counseling program that stripped you away and built you back up. And the way you articulate, I was expecting to find, I don't know, man, just awareness, like insight, this like deep, but most of the interviews were like that, but there were some, from individuals in the community that's really outspoken, that you walk away feeling like, man, are we as a field in a good state? Are we to prepare students to be able to navigate these thoughts and beliefs? Because the world is getting more political. People, that's one thing, about, President Trump's election, and then beyond, more people are involved. More people want to use their voice, which is great, but, do we as a profession, are we capable of training and navigating and having those discussions in class? Because some of the participants were counselor educators, and I'm walking away from those interviews like, man, I don't think you're ready to have a conversation without getting, emotionally reactive, because I tell you, man, in that first class in Virginia, when the election night, and I didn't know what to do. I'm teaching about ethics. The classes, people are crying, terrified, right. Because we had people from all over the world in that class, and having to navigate those waters, I'm like, gosh, I really need to start watching the news. Oh my gosh. Like, I felt so uninformed. Gosh. Yeah. So that's what I expected, and I realized quickly that counselors are humans too. No matter how much training we go through, we still get affected by things. We're not perfect. Yeah. So, yeah. So
are there tools that you have developed or come across kind of on the heels of this research that you think has helped counselors to be able to do some of this work that might be needed to kind of come to more of this kind of mature, self-actualized place?
Yeah. One of the things we found in the research was dialogue with diverse individuals. Because I think what tends to happen is people, they create these echo chambers, where everybody's kind of saying the same thing and everybody feels comfortable, right. But having the relational courage to be uncomfortable and have conversations with people who may disagree with you, and being culturally humble doing that dialogue allows people to be impacted by other people's life experiences. And going into the conversations thinking, this person isn't trying to change me, I'm trying to understand them. That those are two different orientations in a discussion, and being able to go into those discussions with that allows you to just listen,
Well, and that's the main difference between a dialogue and two simultaneous lectures.
Yes.
If you watch cable news,
yes,
they're not engaging in dialogue typically. They're engaging in parallel lecturing.
Yes.
The difference being one incorporates listening and the other does not. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to engage in a back and forth repartee with someone and think that you're engaged in dialogue when you're really not, because you're just speaking your points, and maybe you're doing it cordially, but you're speaking your points and you're formulating your points, but you're not open to really hearing and trying to understand what the other person's saying. You're not looking for the humanity or, where can I see where they're coming from here? What you're looking for, if you're listening for anything, you're listening for something that you can counter, or you're listening for, and when you're not engaged in dialogue, I should say, with that parallel lecturing, you're listening for, what points can I trip them up on, or what points can I, provide evidence to the contrary? How can I provide a counterpoint to what they're saying? Mm-hmm. That's not dialogue. That's parallel lecturing.
Yeah. One of the reasons that this topic was of interest to me is because I've sort of been thinking about, and it's something we've talked about some within our church, is just how we arrive at the views that we hold.
Yeah.
And we might have thoughts about how we do that. And especially as Christians, right? Like we might have thoughts of, well, I've arrived at the views that I hold because this is what the Bible says. Mm-hmm. And that can blind us to maybe other influences just from our parents, the ways that we grew up, the region of the country we grew up in, the way that we read the Bible, all kinds of other influences that would feed into that we kind of then, I think, tend to filter through a theological lens.
Sure.
And I think maybe we hold those a little more deeply, because where we say this is what God is wanting of me, and so I've got to hold to it. And so I think as it relates to politics, I think maybe that many of us as Christians believe that we hold the political views we do because of what we believe about God, because of how we read the Bible. On and on we could go. But again, there may be other factors that are informing our political views that may be driving some of that more than we would originally care to admit or recognize. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of one thing I've been wondering about. One is there work that we can do to kind of figure some of that out? And I think dialogue would be maybe some of that. Maybe that would be one thing. But like, is there introspective work that we could do to help us reflect on what really informs our values, our beliefs, and how we came to those things?
Absolutely. Going back to the study, one of the things that we found was this almost like slingshot effect that people have with their beliefs. So it's almost like, and this has a lot to do with attachment too. People would kind of believe what their parents believed. Then they'd get out of the house. They'd find their own way. And then fear would step in and they'd slingshot back, to those old kind of familiar homeostatic patterns, And when we asked them why do you believe what you believe? There was, I would say probably a good 80 to 90% of interviews, that answer started with a pause. Why do you believe what you believe? There was like I don't really know. Let me see, And so I think that's where you start. I think you start with the question, why do I believe what I believe? Really, why do I believe what I believe? And talk through it. But then also ask, origin stories of people, like your parents, grandparents. Tell me a little bit about your belief, because those things are filtered throughout our experiences. And then read books from both sides, watch news from both sides, right? Get a full holistic viewpoint of this stuff, the more you can get yourself out of an echo chamber, I feel like the more open you are to insight, and so that's one of the biggest ways. And it's helped me, doing the research when we did it. I went back and asked my parents, like, why was grandpa that, and having those discussions, I don't know, put my life and my beliefs into perspective, and I felt like it gave me more control over them. Like the more awareness I had, the more malleable my beliefs were. They didn't change. They weren't less convicted, but they were able to be shaped, I think, a little bit with intentionality, which I think changed it, because a lot of individuals feel stuck in I'm Republican or I'm Democrat because I've always been, and we'll examine that a little bit, you can grow, growth and change are two different things. You can't conflate them, but give yourself the option to grow. I think that's probably, one of the things that stands out most. Yeah.
You mentioned that this slingshot effect of kind of going away, doing some stuff, whatever, exploring, and then coming back to the views that we grew up with in a lot of cases. Do you find that, is there a correlation between kind of a person's attachment to their parents and that slingshot effect? Like, in other words, I would seem to expect that someone would slingshot back to what they grew up with the more healthily attached and connected they are to their parents. Is that true, or does it not matter?
I want to get Jason's opinions on this. I'll say, from my experience, it doesn't matter. Like,
it's just kind of what I grew up with is going to impact me regardless of whether I've got a healthy or unhealthy relationship with that family of origin.
For sure, because, most individuals, right, especially if they don't have a lot of awareness or insight, which is not a bad thing. We all grow up with some level of blind spots, right? The body doesn't care. health or unhealth.
Right.
It just cares about homeostasis. That's why people.
So this is what I know, regardless of whether or not it's actually traumatic or healthy.
For sure, this is what feels comfortable. Which is why people will even if a person that they're attached to, a partner, is different, right? When fear comes in or anxiety comes in, they will work to change that relationship back to something that is comfortable, whether or not it's healthy or unhealthy. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, when Warren was asking that question, my first thought was, I don't think it matters. Now, granted, I've never done research into this. I've never looked at, the slingshot effect and, how a person's beliefs as an adult, how that may be correlated to the attachment with their family. I will say, from a family systems perspective, now we're going to nerd out a little bit.
For sure. I'm ready.
From a family systems perspective, attachments are not always healthy. You can have unhealthy attachments and healthy attachments. And in healthy attachments, I think that creates an environment where kids, as they grow up and become adults, have more freedom to explore their own beliefs and freedom to engage in, okay, why do I believe what I believe? Why, what actually do I think about this topic? And maybe that comes out a little bit different in fact, it'll probably come out at least a little bit different from the previous generation. And it might be, more conservative. It might be more liberal. It might be more one direction, more another. It might be more religious. It might be more secular. I think the assumption is that younger people are more liberal and secular, and older people are more religious and conservative. And that might be like the broad population trends, but within any given family, it doesn't always go that way. And so when you think about like that slingshot effect, it is kind of going back to what I know, but from a healthy perspective, what I know is kind of based in some truths that I have reckoned with, and some aspects of my life, not judging the veracity or the legitimacy of it, but that there are some things in my life that actually do have some value, even if it might be somewhat complicated. Whereas, I mentioned the healthy attachments, the unhealthy attachments, that's where you see people like digging in their heels and really not examining why they believe what they believe. They're just going to hold on to a particular belief for dear life, which might be the same as their parents, or another unhealthy attachment is being a reaction to their parents. I didn't have a good relationship with my parents, or I didn't like the way that they did things, and so I'm not at all going to hold the beliefs that they hold. And it's not really any better to take that position simply as a reaction to my experience with my parents. It's just a different way of responding to a strained, maybe unhealthy attachment. Yeah. So I've encountered a number of people who say, "Oh yeah, I broke away from that. The toxic household that I grew up in, and I don't believe anything like that." Well, okay, maybe you don't, but there's still a lot of unhealthy attachment processes going on here, and maybe some very unhealthy, like unexamined beliefs that probably could use a little bit more introspection. Anyway.
Yeah. It's almost like the more you say I will never, the higher the likelihood that you will.
Yeah.
Because the more you push it away, the less you're aware of how it's kind of finding its way in to your interactions and your belief system. I feel like it's better to ask, how might I become? Like, instead of how do I avoid? Because the more you kind of are aware of how these things are, happening, the more control you have over it.
sounds like it connects back to the points that you were making earlier, Jude, about trust and fear. Like if fear is the driving force,
absolutely,
then that's going to lead me to a certain, not only set of decisions, but with a certain kind of framework and perspective in mind.
Absolutely. And if we're going to get like really biblical, like if we think about attachment to parents and how that impacts our political and religious views, I think it's probably just as important to examine our attachment to God, and how that secure or insecure attachment impacts our trust and our fear, and how our trust and our fear impacts our religious and political beliefs, and the decisions we make and the behaviors we make because of those decisions. It all stems back to that attachment to God. But
man, that's fascinating. Yeah, because I think sometimes in church lingo, we want to use kind of churchy words like grace and law or legalism.
Yeah,
that maybe sometimes are just kind of covers for secure or insecure attachment to God, and how that impacts how I live out my faith, what decisions I make, what I do. That's interesting.
And there's no, I say this, man, like attachment is it's not good or bad. It's just a thing. Attachment styles can change as you grow and learn and dive more and have more dialogue. And then as you pull out of community because of some reason, that attachment may change. You can go back and forth. I think it's important to that people hear that like these things aren't rigid ways of being that, well, I'm insecurely attached, that's my life. Like, no, you can work and change and grow and have experiences and hear different discussions and listen to podcasts and that will reorient you and change your attachment, so it's not all lost if you feel insecurely attached to your mom, like it's okay.
Right.
You can grow with that.
Well, and that's, we've talked in various conversations here at our church about just kind of that echo chamber effect and how we tend to exist in those things in our current culture. And I think it's sort of ironic that you're right. Like we have so much access to information now through books, podcasts, videos, whatever, that it's sort of ironic that we've got maybe more access to various perspectives than we've ever had. And yet the echo chamber effect is maybe stronger as well because of social media and the people we tend to have conversations with and how that influences how we go into those conversations.
We can more tightly curate our environment. And so, whereas before, we might live in a community that was relatively homogeneous, but there would be some diversity in there. Well, we can now filter out as much diversity as we want from not just our social media feeds, but even down to like, if a particular church, if we want a different nuance, we can find a different church to attend that contains that nuance, or, even our work environment. There are lots of different areas in which we can really carefully curate who we're interacting with and what kind of messages we get. And if we don't like what we hear or what we see, then we're, very eager and able to move on.
Yep.
Right. Jude, it made me think about too, when you were talking earlier about the interviews that you did in your research, how you were kind of surprised at things that people would say, and y'all were being very intentional about not sharing your political, religious views, whatever, because you're just the researchers. It made me think that it would have been interesting in some of those conversations. Like, what if you had a room just like full of Trump campaign memorabilia, or a room just full of Obama or Hillary posters, right? And how would people's words and how would that impact what people would share and how they would share it? I mean, it would obviously have an impact.
Man.
but just your attempts to not share any of that, how that led to maybe different comments that would have come out that might not have been shared otherwise.
Absolutely. I mean, people like, you'd ask the interview and people would Google you and they'd probably see a picture, like a faculty picture, and they just assume, they would just make assumptions that like, oh yeah, you're probably Democratic, you're probably this, and it's like, they come to that, and you can hear it in interviews where people are talking and they'll say things like, I mean, almost as if like you're on their side, you know?
Right.
And it's just you being a good listener, but you just kind of go with it, you know? Like, yeah, sure. I don't know. Tell me a little bit about what you think you know. You know, just to get more data that way, you know. But
sure,
it's for sure. That stuff plays a huge part. People's
perspective.
That's a good dissertation topic for somebody who's listening.
Yeah.
Well, and so in some of the emails that we were trading kind of leading up to this conversation, you had mentioned in one of those that the protest a couple of summers ago led to some white Christian clients intentionally seeking you out as a therapist to discuss the intersection between their political, religious, and social viewpoints. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, but kind of to connect that to what we were just talking about. Do you feel like you have clients that make assumptions about you because of your race, your appearance, whatever it is? Like, are there assumptions that you feel like people are making about you that they're coming into kind of the opposite of maybe what we were talking about earlier, just that there are things that people are kind of assuming about you based on your appearance, what they see, all that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, I think going into especially a new client, right, just almost expecting that there are some assumptions that they're making about me, you know? And I mean, I give clients the opportunity to ask me questions, whatever they need to know about me to feel comfortable. If I'm comfortable sharing, I will, you know? But yeah, I just expect it, you know? And do my best in the therapeutic relationship to navigate those expectations, you know? Because I want them to have a genuine relationship with me, you know? At the end of therapy, more than growth and change, I want my clients to feel like they know me, you know? And I want them to feel like I know them. And so to do that, we gotta, you know, dissolve those expectations so you can have a more realistic, you know, perspective on people, which is parallel, because that's kind of what you're trying to get people to do outside in their real lives, you know. But yeah, it's almost a given, you know, some reaction. So and you know, they may, you know, show it differently in the way they sit or the way they walk in or how they shake my hand. You know, different clients shake my hand differently, you know. I don't know why they try to dap me up, but some clients do, and I'm like, we don't have to do this, you know. We don't have to do like it's not like a cultural sign of, you know. Anyway, so
it's not cultural humility to try to dap you up. That's what you're saying.
It's not a social justice. It's not a victory for social justice, man. If you it's just not. So yeah, I do my best to just kind of, you know, maneuver around people's expectations and try, you know, my best to get them to see me, you know, my culture and all, you know, so yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I've had some great stories. I go in for a handshake and people, I'm like, whoa. All right. We're doing it. We're doing it. All right.
That's great. It made me think, I don't know if this is an apt comparison, but it made me think of the Key and Peele sketch.
Yes.
Where he's Obama.
Yeah, with Obama. That's
afterwards.
Exactly it. Yeah. That's exactly it. You know, and some clients you want to do that with, but others you're like, you don't have to do it. But to get back to the point or the question, right? Or maybe what I heard was the question was, yeah, I think people, you know, maybe especially white Christians doing those protests, I think they were really just looking to understand, you know. And it was an interesting position to be in, because I don't want to be in the position of teaching people about these things, you know. But there was these interesting dialogues where I think a lot of people, and sometimes they would come in for just one or two sessions, you know, just to hear a different perspective and have maybe a deeper conversation with somebody that they didn't have to worry about offending, even though they may offend me, you know. They don't have to worry about offending me, which I think drops people's guards a little bit to be themselves, you know. So it was an interesting summer that summer. Yeah, because I was not expecting. So I didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah. You mentioned you didn't want the responsibility of teaching some of these things. Is that a burden that you feel like you carry as an African-American man? Is it? Do you feel like it's an expectation placed on you by others that then becomes burdensome?
I think it's an expectation, especially in the role that I feel like I'm in sometimes in therapy. In my everyday life, I can easily just kind of avoid the training, or the talking, and I mostly do. But in therapy, it's a little bit different, when somebody comes in and they're very like genuinely asking for help. I mean, like I chose you because I have anger. I don't know I'm confused. I'm lost. I want to come to someone who may understand this and who would be able to walk me through this kind of cultural awakening, and that's the way I frame it in my mind, which makes it less of a burden when I'm in session, is that everybody has that cultural awakening where they realize I'm Black or I'm white or I'm Latinx, right? And what does that mean for my position in the world and the way I walk down my street and the way I shop at Walmart, and helping people navigate that stuff is part of therapeutic process, but me telling you which words you can't say or can say, it's not fun at all.
Yeah.
It's just not. I'm like, I don't want to do that, man. I'm going through some stuff too. Like,
right.
Well, I feel like that's our responsibility it's not just a matter of knowing, okay, what words do you say or not say? Every word that you really shouldn't say, there's a reason behind it. Yeah. And so I feel like we have a responsibility to educate ourselves on, okay, what's the history of that word? Mm-hmm. What's the legacy of that word? What are the words that have been used to be abusive or oppressive to anyone, either because of their race, gender, sexuality, whatever? And how do we learn not just what the words are, but what the stories are that created, the connotation behind those words. And that's where I think we have a responsibility as we interact with other people to learn those aspects of the story. And you're right, you don't have to be the one to educate. There's already a lot of ways for us to educate ourselves out there.
For sure. Especially now. It's just like there's so much more resources out there.
Yeah, across a variety of platforms and sort of ways that it's given to you. Like I remember for me, even several years ago when I was kind of first starting to think about some of these things, I remember the show Blackish was even like influential for me.
Oh yeah.
And I thought some of the things they did in that show, I thought were really smart and well done, just about how they presented some of the things in a sitcom format that probably makes it a little, it goes down a little easier perhaps if you can present it in a sitcom. And even like I mentioned, Key and Peele sketches, like even those, I think they were helpful for a lot of people, of just anything that can cause you to kind of take a step back and examine something from a different perspective is helpful, I think, and can then maybe open the door to some harder conversations.
Absolutely.
Some different perspectives that you might not have been open to previously,
and deeper change. I mean, that's the whole balance, right? Is how do you facilitate someone's awareness without triggering their insecurities? That's the whole balance in a conversation about these things, about political, religious beliefs.
Can you say that again? How
do you facilitate people's awareness without triggering their insecurities? Because the minute you trigger somebody's insecurity, they'll get defensive or they're hurt, and you can't get in. So it's like a constant, and that's part of training counselors to be therapeutically present, because all we do in therapy is talk about people's insecurities. Sometimes you talk about some fun stuff, but for the most part, you're talking about things that people are insecure about to some extent. And so how do you have those conversations in a way that's safe enough for that person to slowly dive deeper into those things? That's the name of the game. If you can figure that out, if you can work that muscle, then man, your relationships are that much stronger because of it.
That's helpful stuff.
Good.
So we'll we could keep talking about this all day, probably, but we'll press pause there at least.
Okay. Okay.
I'd be curious to know what other people might other thoughts that people might have, or ideas or questions that this may bring up for some of our listeners. But Jude, I appreciate you jumping on with us today and taking some time to think about this. And I certainly think there are obviously connections here that all of us can be aware of as we strive to engage each other, be aware of our own values, thoughts, how we came to those things, explore those as we try to be present with each other. So appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for, opening this space for this dialogue, because it's so important. It's important to me, but I feel like it's also important to our community that we're able to facilitate these discussions, man. So I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate you and the work that you and Jason and others do to invest in people through the venue of or forum of counseling. I do think is valuable and helpful to the community, to individuals and to families. So I appreciate all the work that y'all do. All right. So we typically close these things in prayer. And so Jason, you want to end us in prayer for this morning? Sure.
I'd be glad to. Our wonderful Father, we approach you this morning, a species that can be very selfish, that can be very insecure, and that can be very fearful and fearful of the wrong things. Lord, I ask for forgiveness, and I pray for the humility that as we encounter our fellow humans, that we may engage with them with compassion and with the knowledge that your Spirit resides in them as it does in us. Give us the strength to be able to confront our own prejudices and our own struggles with others with respect and with humility and with a desire to learn and grow closer to you through the varied experiences and dynamics of other people. We thank you for the way that you guide us and teach us. And Lord, those guidances and lessons are very often difficult and sometimes even painful. But Lord, I pray that you will help us to grow through that, that we won't see that struggle and that pain as indicative of something that is bad, but that is indicative of our own growth. It's challenging and it's scary, but with you by our side and with you as our guide, we can make it through and be stronger and be more whole and have a fuller life in you with our fellow human. Thank you so much for your Son and for the example that he provided to us in these matters. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.